Hi, everyone. We're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Kristen.
I am Dr. Erin.
And welcome to our coverage of Netflix's critically acclaimed drama, Unbelievable,
Yes.
which stars a lot of people, but the three main actors that you may know are Kaitlyn Dever,
Yes.
Toni Collette, and Merritt Wever.
Yes. Kaitlyn Dever of Booksmart fame.
And also of, a television show she was on for a very long time that I cannot remember right now.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Yeah, she's been around. Toni Collette, you may just know her as a general queen. Most recently seen in Knives Out. And Merritt Wever, who I know and love from Nurse Jackie, but she's also been in Godless and a couple other things.
Yeah, she was fantastic in Godless. That was my first long-term encounter with her. I did not watch Nurse Jackie, but I'm a Merritt Wever stan from Godless, so I'm excited that she's in this season.
So the premise of this is has been oft talked about, but let's just all get caught up. The series is based on a 2015 article that appeared, a Pulitzer Prize winning article by Christian Miller and Ken Armstrong that appeared in ProPublica called An Unbelievable Story of Rape. Around the same time, there was also an episode on This American Life. And the American Life episode was called Anatomy of Doubt.
Ooh.
So we will link to both of those in the show notes. This article is kind of so famous it has its own Wikipedia page. It's kind of a big deal. Also because sometimes ProPublica articles are hard to come by. The premise is this: a girl named Marie, which is the pseudonym that is used. The primary case that we're talking about takes place in Linwood, Washington, which is a small town. It appears somewhere, at least in the show, like kind of in Seattle-ish, but who knows?
Who knows? Washington, the state of Washington.
Washington for sure. A girl named Marie who lives in a transitional housing project out of foster care makes a claim of sexual assault. She is then, at first the police, she goes straight to the police. She does all the things that, all of us as women are told to do. She eventually recants her story. The police then put her on trial for offering false witness.
Mm-hmm.
When we fast forward several years, two police detectives in Colorado, the characters that are played by Toni Collette and Merritt Wever, discover a serial rapist who behaves the same pattern, the same architecture as Marie's case. And through a whole lot of kind of aren't we lucky machinations, it's connected that Marie was, in fact, raped. And while the police officer, who was the kind of primary driver of the case against her, to my knowledge, has never apologized, she did win a financial settlement. So I want to start off with all of that at the beginning for a couple of reasons. One, this is a really triggery show.
Yeah.
It's unflinching. Kaitlyn Dever's performance is unflinching. And we kind of want you to know that Marie, the person who is Marie now, is married with children. And while we have no indication that she's happy or anything, she appears to be functional. So on some level, this has a resolved ending, if not a happy one. And we want you to know that going in. But even just from episode 1, which is what we're going to talk about today, what we really would encourage everyone to pay attention to is the realities contained within this story. There are many myths and misconceptions and misunderstandings around sexual assault, both around the act itself, around survival, around coping mechanisms after the fact. And we have a feeling this show is going to take on quite a lot of them.
Yeah, and
we'll give us a good opportunity to talk about them.
Yeah, and we'll link to a report from the National Sexual Assault Survivors Center. I just had it. Hold on. The National Sexual Violence Resource Center that is about kind of the idea of false reporting. And it tackles a lot of myths and statistics around the reporting of sexual assault and sexual violence. So we'll make sure that's in the show notes as well if you want to read further about it. But for me, there were a couple things that struck me about this episode. Kaitlyn Dever's portrayal of a very clearly traumatized woman, and the intimate way in which you follow her through the process of reporting, which a lot of people don't know what that looks like, or the burden that that puts on victims and survivors. And the show shows you that, from everything from the first police contact through the medical treatment and the rape kit testing and all of that goes along with the sexual assault exam. It's just, yeah, like you feel like you're in the room with her all the time. And that's really powerful storytelling from the people who've made this show. Yeah. So for me, that was the biggest impact of this episode, but also the ways in which it starts, as Dr. Kristen said, starts to have these conversations about myths about sexual assault survivors, perceptions about how people who are survivors are supposed to behave. That comes up particularly with the relationship that she had with one of her foster care moms, who discloses to the police that she was also a survivor of sexual assault. But because Marie wasn't behaving the same way this woman did after her assault, she thought it was questionable. There is no right or wrong way or correct or appropriate way to behave if you are a victim or survivor of sexual assault, but there's a lot of myths about how men and women are supposed to behave or supposed to look or supposed to act, that perpetuates a lot of bias in the system. Yeah, that was really, really hard to hear. And then we start to get the bad guy, clearly, of these first couple of episodes is going to be one of the detectives that starts to talk about this idea that she might be falsely reporting after her foster care mom comes and says, like, I have some doubt about the way she's talking about it. Her foster mom says that she's has a look at me attitude. So again, this false myth that like somehow she might have been making up this story in order to get attention. And the detective talks about it a little bit afterwards with his colleague and talks about a specific instance that he remembers of a man who was imprisoned because of a false report, which is a lot of the narrative that's pushed about reporting sexual assault, is that women might be making it up for whatever reason. And I said, we'll share the link to the report below, but just so you know, anywhere from 2 to 10% of reports of sexual assault are false reporting. So very, very, very unlikely in any given situation that a person reporting is going to be making the story up. And that was one of the things I remember when we watched the episode that Dr. Kristen commented on, watching that first like 20-25 minute sequence of what a person has to go through. And we were just like, who would ever lie about something so that they would have to go through this kind of subjugation? Like, why would you make something up and then go through all of this?
Yeah. And what's interesting, so in full disclosure as well, I've worked with survivors for a long time. I got a privilege to intern at a domestic violence shelter. And I have a lot of very close friends who are survivors. And I've done research with survivors as well. And so I've gotten to kind of hold space for testimony a lot. So these are narratives I've been living with for a long time. And subsequently, as my best friend, I've been forcing Dr. Aaron to live with for a long time.
I have friends who are also survivors of sexual assault, as most humans do, given the statistics.
Yeah.
And working with Dr. Kristen on this research as well has provided a lot of insight that heretofore I did not have, even in my life and my awareness. But yeah, we try and create space in the work that we do for these testimonials and for the stories of people and their experiences. And I think that's what this show does brilliantly as well. I don't know what point you were trying to make, but
it's okay. I was just going to say, one of the things that comes up in in narratives again and again is about how the woman, the victim, the survivor's body. I mean, it's about 85% most likely women, and women presenting humans, depending on that. Sexual assault against transgender individuals is a different category that I don't think we're measuring properly. But that's a separate category. That's a separate conversation. The crime scene is the body.
Yeah.
And that makes it a very unique crime. So when we talk about trauma and crime, one of the things that a lot of trauma counselors, for instance, really encourage survivors of violent crime to do is to never return to the scene of the crime, except in a therapeutic environment. Whereas for sexual assault, you are carrying the scene with you. And so the re-traumatization process of having the scene processed is not a small thing. And now, I mean, I've read lots. I've talked to detectives who have to do this. I've talked to ER nurses who perform the kits. And there's a lot of like, man, I wish we could do it differently. Like, we haven't figured out a way to gather this very important data, especially DNA, without having to do a OB exam, like without having to do a gynecological exam, without having to scrape under their fingernails, without having to do a rectal exam in the case of males. Like, it's, and that's, I think, something that often gets lost in the public narratives of sexual assault, is that it's not something that happened to you once, it is something that happens to you. However many times you relive that memory. And this show does a great chance of showing that too. So we don't see the full assault on screen. What we see instead is flashbacks that Marie has. And they are sharp and unfocused, and the timeline's weird, just like memories of trauma are. We should say too, I just double checked this really quick. 2008 is when this crime occurred, and the scientific community had yet to convince law enforcement that memory was subjective after trauma, which we are still in the process of doing, but it's a little bit more accepted now. So this was very much in the time where memory was assumed to be linear all the time. And if your memory wasn't linear, you were lying.
You were lying, something was wrong. Yeah. And we get that really strongly in this episode, as she's questioned multiple times about what happened to her. And I think that idea of re-traumatization is what they show so clearly.
Yep.
In that every time she is asked by a different individual to recount what happened to her. And so much of it is for the record, right? Like you said, like so much of it is what is dictated by medical professionals, by legal professionals. But every time she has to recall it, she relives parts of it in her memory as she's attempting to answer their questions, as she's attempting to say like where the shoelaces came from, when she picked up the knife, like all of these factual parts of it. But she can never take away the emotional trauma of that. And like, it's not like she can just say, oh, I'll put that part of my brain on pause and just tell you the facts.
And some people can do that. Like, let's be really clear too. Like, that's one of the things I, as a survivor of other kinds of trauma, am perpetually jealous of people who can minorly disassociate and or compartmentalize, because that is not something that my survival or my anxiety allows me to do.
Yeah.
But there are definitely people that can do that. But that is not normal, just the way that my response is not normal, and the way that normal is a setting on a dryer and that's it. There is a range of therapeutically normalized response. So I was really, I'm like, proud is a stupid word, but I don't have another one, of the filmmakers for being this unflinching in this episode, of watching Marie, who is ostensibly alone in the world. She has, I mean, at best, support systems with holes in them.
Yeah.
Navigate this very difficult time. I was also struck that, like, she didn't, because she was aged out of the system, she didn't have a support advocate in the room. And I don't know the laws in Washington. I should have done that research, but like, oh my gosh. Sexual assault support advocates are huge, and most shelters often offer training around that.
Yeah. Yes.
She was an 18-year-old child in a lot of ways. I understand that she was legally an adult, but Caitlin Dever's portrayal of this woman tells us that she's not an adult.
Right.
She's still in the process of learning how to be one.
Right.
She was alone in the room with detectives. And that felt wrong to me. And the research I've done says that the real Marie was as well.
Yeah, that did feel like a violation of her right for representation or just for support going through that. And there was a lot of the law enforcement side of this that we were questioning as we were watching it, right? Like, why are there only male detectives available? Like, I just turned to Dr. Kristen at one point. I was like, where's Olivia Benson from from SVU? Like, where is this advocate for her that can help shape the way in which law enforcement is engaging with this human and what has happened to them? So there was a distinct lack of, I mean, there was empathy, I think, from some of the law enforcement officers that was shown. It was very nuanced throughout the episode. But I think what they also did a really good job of showing was kind of the impact to your life outside of your engagement with those professionals. Her changing relationship with the people who were like her counselors at this transitional housing. Her relationship with the people that she was friends with, particularly after she recants her story through, from my best interpretation, coercion, but still recants her story, and like the way she is ostracized and the way she is treated by the young women and the young men in this housing facility was really, I think, really important too, because there's a lot of stigmas about sexual assault and how survivors and victims are supposed to behave and reintegrate into society, return to society, to their relationships. And there's so much we don't understand and we don't give room for that leads to a lot of this stigmatization and ostracization that happens. And yeah, fair dues to the show, because while this story is taking place in 2008, and they don't, I think, specifically state the year, but they do have Motorola razors. So,
oh my gosh, that was amazing.
So we're definitely dating ourselves, as this is something that took place in the past, but we're watching it in the lens of 2020, right? 2019 and 2020, where we've had this wave. We go through waves of societal reckoning on sexual assault. So we're in a wave now with the popularity of the Me Too movement becoming a lot more popular. The movement's been around for quite some time, but we have a kind of a resurgence of our awareness of it. The Time's Up movement and conversations around how we as a society deal with sexual assault. So we're all watching it through that lens, which for me makes it just harder to believe how bad it is or was, and that it might still be that bad in terms of how people are treated and how we deal with it as a society. And that's what's difficult for me to watch, knowing that this is accurately how bad it was in 2008 and that we still haven't come that far, both in terms of law enforcement and therapy and support, but also like societal understanding and stigmatization. So another joyful pick from The Good Doctors, I think.
Guys, we watch happy things, we promise. So the next episode, we're going to start dividing our time between 2008 and 2011, between Golden, Colorado, and Linwood, Washington. So that means the appearance of both Toni and Merritt, which is welcome at this point.
Cannot wait for more ladies in the show.
It is time. So we will be back with that coverage. There's 10 episodes of this, believe it or not. So again, this is a important watch. We don't mean it like homework TV, but more so if you are somebody who is thinking about widening your popular culture consumption or your fictional consumption to hear other people's stories in a way, this is a good place to start.
Yeah.
Because Marie is a stand-in for millions and millions of women throughout time who have been doubted or made to recant, to be honest.
Convinced that what happened to them didn't happen to them or didn't happen to them the way that they were called.
Correct. We even call that gaslighting now. So this is a very, very common story in human experience throughout history. And this is a really, so far, solid representation of said experience. So
yeah, we'll see. But we are looking forward to the rest of the season, into continuing the discussion of these really important issues, which we spend a lot of time talking about here at Abbey Research and the work that we do on gender and diversity and inclusion, and particularly issues around gender and sexual assault and harassment and discrimination. So it's part of the work that we do here, and one of the reasons why we chose this show to follow up with our continuing coverage of things we think you should watch on television. But I think that's all for episode 1 for me.
Same here. So we'll see you in episode 2.
Sounds good. Take care, everybody.
Bye.